Now we have the pleasure of getting a little preview of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park from a duo, Pat Gregerson of the National Park Service and Jaime Shimek of the U.S. Department of Energy. So by way of introduction, for those of you who haven't followed the ins and outs of how the law turned out, it basically gives the park a joint ownership or management between the Department of Energy, whose properties are going to be many of the significant properties of the park, and the Department of Interior, which is the home of the National Park Service. And what Patrick and Jaime will explain is what's going on now to get this park up and running, and how the two agencies are going to be working together. Patrick is the Chief of Planning at the National Park Service, so we have the right person here to talk about the plans. And Jaime Shimek is kind of a twofer, because not only is she with the Department of Energy now as, get the title right here, as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Senate Affairs for the Department of Energy. She spent 6 years as a senior staffer for Senator Murray, Patty Murray of Washington, who was an exemplary leader in general, but also specifically in helping to get this park established. So she has a very long history and involvement with the Manhattan Project, and we're grateful for all she has done. But I think we'll start now with Patrick, and we have some slides, so if you want to cue those, we'll get those going.
What I'm going to do is a quick introduction of myself, then I'm going to let Jaime do her introduction, and then she's going to talk about what's happening now with the development of the Memorandum of Agreement, and then I'll take over to talk about where we go with our planning efforts and bringing things together, and then Jamie's going to finish up. So I am the Chief of Planning for the National Park Service. Part of my job is also in charge of special resource studies, which is what an act of Congress requests the National Park Service to do when we're looking at potential new units of the National Park System. And so my office would put together those, the study, just like this study that was taking place here, and then go before Congress. But we look at 4 different criteria. The first criteria we look at is national significance. If it meets that criteria, then we look at suitability, feasibility, and need for NPS management. After we look at that, we make a decision on whether it meets all those criteria. If it does, it goes forward to the Secretary for signature. Then the Secretary would sign that, and then it would go on to Congress for their decision on whether they want to make it a unit or not. Even if we come up with a negative finding, let's say it meets the national significance, but it doesn't meet one of the other criteria, and we go with the negative finding, Congress still has the authority to make that a unit. And I just wanted to bring that up as part of the process. So it's not always a done deal on our side. But obviously this one was a positive finding, and we're excited that it's now a unit. Jamie?
Thanks, Patrick. Can you guys hear me? No? Closer? Better? All right, I'll try not to eat the microphone and talk louder. My name is Jaime Shimek, and as Cindy mentioned, I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Senate Affairs at the Department of Energy. First, I just want to say how pleased both Patrick and I are to be with you all today, and thank you very much to Cindy and the Atomic Heritage Foundation for inviting us here to talk with you about this important subject. We are representing our respective agencies and also the primary working group members who are doing the day in and day out work on this important effort. They're actually in Los Alamos right now for their 3rd and final site visit. So otherwise, I know some of them would be here today. As Cindy mentioned, I spent a significant amount of my career before coming to DOE working for Senator Patty Murray. My history on Hanford issues runs very deep. I grew up on a farm, a wheat farm with no irrigation in eastern Washington, about an hour away from Hanford in the Tri-Cities. So I guess you could say it's in my blood. But when I first came to Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., I first worked for Senator Maria Cantwell, who's been another champion for the park. And in fact, one of the first issues that I learned about was Hanford and its importance to the state of Washington and also to our nation. I was proud that my first bill that I ever got to write was the legislation authorizing the special resource study. Patrick may not have been as excited because he got to do a bunch of work. But you know, the exciting thing about that bill is it really kicked off DOE and the Park Services work together on this issue. And it was really this partnership that made the idea of a multi-site, multi-state national park unit feasible. You know, as Patrick and I were talking about before we came in here, you know, I had almost forgotten that this had almost gone in the tank. Because the Park Service was very concerned, and rightly so, about how would they deal with things inside a secured fence, and how would they deal with land they didn't own. In response, DOE became a very committed partner and took on the responsibility for the safeguards and security of the public and allowing them onto our sites. And so with DOE as a committed partner, the Park Service was able to recommend to Congress the establishment of a park. Like many of you in this room, I've been involved in this issue for so many years, and like you guys, I was absolutely thrilled last year when Congress authorized the park. A huge thanks goes to Senator Heinrich and obviously former Congressman Doc Hastings, who really he did blood, sweat, and tears, everything to get that bill into the defense authorization. But all of the members of the Washington State delegation, New Mexico delegation, and Tennessee delegation were amazing. And most of all, thank you all in this room for all of your efforts. Without your grassroots, ground-up support, this couldn't have happened. Moving into sort of what are we doing now as the two agencies tasked with putting this park together. The first item we are working on, prescribed by the legislation, is a memorandum of agreement, which I'll call an MOA. We are working together to establish the park, which will be established by the signing of the MOA. The MOA is a very high-level starting point that will allow our agencies to establish the park and identify how they will work together in the future. It will govern roles and responsibilities, including provisions for enhanced public access, management, interpretation, and historic preservation, all very important items. Things that we do not expect to see in the MOA at this point is details about the park interpretive themes. Patrick will talk about how those are developed in a bit. We're not at this point going to be putting out locations for the park headquarters, so plenty of time to lobby on that. And we're not going to have a ton of specifics about what places outside of DOE properties could be initially included at the park at this time. We'll address all of those details as we continue subsequent planning efforts. But I can tell you, because I have been on the implementation team, teams from both of our agencies have been working together for months. And I have to tell you that the team atmosphere is just incredible. Both agencies are really excited to keep moving ahead on the park and to continue developing this new and innovative park model. Before we finalize the MOA, DOE and NPS will consult with interested state, county, and local officials in the Manhattan Project communities, as well as key stakeholders, advocacy organizations, and members of the public. Put another way, this will be coming out for public comment, coming soon, summer 2015. And as we continue to develop this MOA and engage in all of the subsequent planning processes, DOE and the Park Service are committed to working with the public to ensure that this is an open process. In fact, as some of you may know, representatives from DOE and the Park Service have completed 2 of their 3 site visits. They visited Oakridge in March, and Hanford in April, and of course are in Los Alamos as we speak. I know particularly the Park Service folks were really excited to get on the ground, get behind the fence, and see what assets DOE has so that they could start thinking about how to best tell the story of those very important sites. At every visit, our folks have had the opportunity to engage with the public and hear the views of the communities, and the turnout has been just amazing at every single site visit. And so we will make the draft MOA available. We expect that to happen this summer, and we hope that all of you will comment. At this point, I'll turn it over to Patrick for a discussion about establishing a new park and what the next steps will be for this park.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Thanks for the history as well. The important thing that has come out of this legislation is bringing the 2 agencies together to make sure that we are working together from the very beginning. Everyone understands what the park is all about and also how we want to go forward together. So when it comes to establishing this park, as soon as the MOA, Memorandum of Agreement, is signed by both secretaries, it officially becomes a national park. Right now we have 407 units. It keeps varying depending on when the legislation comes through and also when ownership of lands become available. Some of the parks that came through in this last legislation aren't quite units yet because we don't own property. So they're name only, but as soon as we own, either by donation, fee, purchase, then they become a new unit. With this, usually a unit, and I mentioned this earlier, is that Congress would ask us to do a special resource study, and that process, as I explained earlier, is up to Congress to make that decision. There's another way that we get units, and they become a historical park, and that's through the proclamation process of the President through the Antiquities Act. And 2 recent ones that were established were Pullman in Chicago and Honolulu in Hawaii on the island of Oahu. So how are we going to make this a park? It's 3 units in 3 very separate locations, and that I think that's part of our heavy discussions with the Memorandum of Agreement is, are they separate units? Are they together units with one established headquarters at one site, or are we going to have 3 headquarters? That has not been decided yet. I know that in our special resource study in the decision document, which, by the way, I want to let you know that I wasn't able to bring enough for everyone, but in the back where you had breakfast this morning and maybe you're going to have lunch, I did bring the decision document. I've got about 60 of them back there, so just want to let you know, first come, first serve, so to speak. But we also have that available digitally. If someone wants to have it, we can get that to you anyway. So they'll be in the back. But it did state in here that Los Alamos would be considered the one site that would handle the headquarters. I don't think that's necessarily a fact because we're getting heavy interest from Oakridge, which is understandable. Who's from Oakridge? All right, okay, let's do this. Okay, so who's from Hanford? So Hanford was next. Oh man, well you guys had further to go, so great. And Los Alamos, maybe we don't have as many from Los Alamos since, all right, great.
Very nice, very nice.
So far it's kind of Oakridge and, I'm just kidding, Hanford.
Yeah, we're going to do it by applause meter here. Don't tell the folks back at the ranch.
So anyway, so what we're going to be doing is looking at pieces of property, either inside or outside. The National Park Service may or may not own any of the property. They may lease property. They may co-locate with existing either government agencies or any, maybe there's historical societies that are there. So these are processes we need to figure out during that. So I wanted to let you know that nothing has been decided yet. And as Jamie has mentioned, we are having public meetings at each one of the events at each one of the sites, and they've been pretty prominent in participation. So that's great, and it's going to continue. One of the other things is what about the budget? Maybe people have questions about the budget. In 2016, the president put in $180,000 for the park. What we normally do with a new unit is especially if we don't have land or we don't know how much land is going to be available, we make sure that there's a site manager or a superintendent there. We have a facilities person, but we need to get an understanding of what this park is all about. So we can't just go in and staff it up immediately. So it does take time. Fort Monroe, which was established a number of years ago, still has a small staff due to the fact that we're still trying to learn more about the park, the history, working on interpretation. I'll be talking about that in a minute as well. So I didn't want to make you think that as soon as it gets signed, the park's established and we're going to have 50 employees at each site. That's just not the way things work. As you know, in government, it takes time, but it's good that it takes time. We want to make sure we do the best job. So next steps, 2016. Like I said, there's the budget that we're going to be using, and we have a nice slide up here. One of the first things that we do now is we create a foundation document. It used to be Chapter 1 in our general management plans, but we felt that it was so important that every park should get a foundation document that we actually made a commitment. And you know, you can't see this, but it's 2016 is the centennial of the National Park Service, so we will have a foundation document for every park in the system by next year. And the foundation document, as you can see on the right of the screen up there, it talks about the purpose, significance, and the purpose comes from the legislation. What's the purpose of the park? Then significance, what are those significant aspects within the park that pertains to the legislation, and the purpose is identified. And I've also got a foundation here I'm going to leave in the back. It's both the foundation document and then just what we usually call an overview. It's just a really short and sweet detail of what the park's foundation is about, its purpose, significance. Then it's fundamental resources and values, and fundamental resources and values is very important to identify, and they have to pertain to the reason the park was established. And it's not about, in some of our past parks, and I'm sure you've all visited other national parks, is we need to make sure that we really establish what those fundamental resources are so that those are the main and most important resources to protect, so that they don't be looked at as that's one other thing that we need to protect. Those are the key elements first that we protect. Other resources, of course, are very important, such as endangered species, that sort of thing. We will not let those go by, but we really need to establish those, and that's going to be part of the first process of this. And then we do interpretive themes, and I think that's where we're going to need some help from you folks and the foundation has already done an excellent job on discussing interpretation, and their website is great, and figuring out what those interpretive themes are for the different sites. But again, we're keying in on telling the whole story at each of the sites, but of course each site is different and had its own role to play. So we're going to be looking at that as well. So we'll have the main interpretive theme for the entire project, and then those individual type themes. We do an atlas, which is a map of the sites and all the different resources layered on that. Here and see what else I got. And then the other important aspect is the assessment of planning needs and data needs. So we know it's out there sometimes, but after doing the research, we've talked about that, looking into the the cultural sites, maybe the different ways people got to work, where they lived, that sort of thing. We'll look at that, identify those needs, and then go forward with the next step, which would be a general management plan or a long-range interpretive plan. We haven't decided yet, because it's important to get out there and get the interpretation going, and a general management plan can take some time. And we want to make sure that with all the information we've got and the push to get this established and get those get folks out there to really see the site, we want to make sure that we have a good interpretive program and education program. So we'll probably start that first, and then also begin the general management plan. They do take a number of years. Something like this, especially with three separate sites, is going to be a little more difficult, and some time will be taken for that. But we're going to get started, I think, on what we call a long-range interpretive plan that really deals with, staffing, types of either museum specimens, collections, things like that. What type of materials, even videos, what type of wayside exhibits and things like that. Now, again, the National Park Service is only going to stay on the outside of the fence, what we call it, and we will be sort of the first place the visitors will come, get an understanding of the site, get some basic questions answered, that sort of thing, and then we're going to hand it over, the folks over to the Department of Energy to take them through the site, whatever's available for that. But the Park Service sort of ends at that point, and then they'll come out and visit with us some more or go on. So I just wanted to bring that up. See if I've missed anything. And again, I think, especially with our general management plan, there would be more public involvement in that. We have to do that. So after that, I think I'll give it back to Jamie, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you. What a very informative discussion about what comes next. I'm always learning new things about different agencies. Well, in the meantime, we are not waiting for all of the process to happen in order to work with the Park Service, in order to look at interpreting some of our historic sites. So while DOE and the Park Service work together to develop the park and do all of the planning processes, we do continue to have current public access at a number of our sites. And of course, I think many of you probably know this, but I will start with my favorite first. Hanford's bioreactor. We are doing tours twice a day, several days a week between April and September. I always like to say that the bioreactor is more popular than John Bon Jovi, because whenever we open up ticket reservations, they sell out because they're free in a matter of minutes. So it is a very popular attraction. It has attracted folks from every state in the nation and many, many countries to see how the world's first production reactor was built in under 1 year. Just this year at Hanford, we've opened up Hanford Historic Tours. And in fact, just last week, the public went on their first tours of the pre-Manhattan Project facilities, which is really neat. The beauty of these sites, as you all well know, is anything that is inside the fence, but maybe in a buffer area, was kept in very amazingly pristine condition. And so we were able to open some of that up at the Hanford site for tours. And at Oakridge, where I have not yet had the opportunity to visit, I understand that the bus tour that is included in the price of admission to the American Museum of Science and Energy is amazing, taking folks on a guided tour of the X-10 graphite reactor, the East Tennessee Technology Park, aka the former home of the K-25 gaseous diffusion building, and Y-12's New Hope Center. Those tours run every single day, June through August. So we have a really great opportunities now for folks to see the Park Service, to see the DOE facilities, but what we're really excited about is working with the Park Service to open those up and interpret them in a whole new way. And I'll just close so we can take some questions with just a few brief thoughts. DOE and the Park Service do see the Manhattan Project National Historical Park as an opportunity for people from around the world to visit our historic sites and gain a deeper understanding of the important and world-changing events that happened as part of the Manhattan Project. But we also recognize that there are many aspects, and this is a complicated story. It's a story about the incredible and rapid advances in science and technology that have changed the world. It's a story about the people of the US who came together in a time of war. But it's also a story about the world's first use of nuclear weapons and the tragic stories of death and the destruction that was caused by those weapons as well. And so over the course of the coming years, as the Park Service works to create the narrative of the park, DOE looks forward to working with our friends at the Park Service to present a balanced view of the world-changing events that happened at the Manhattan Project. We look forward to working with you all as well. We sincerely appreciate your great passion for the Manhattan Project and all of your work to save the legacy of those projects. Without you all, I know that, for example, the B reactor would not be in the condition that it is these days. So thank you all for all of your hard work and all of your activism and your service over the years. And I think we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you for the excellent description. Several years ago, the Smithsonian Institution, about a mile from here, opened an exhibit on the dropping of the atomic bomb. In addition to showing pictures and artifacts and descriptions, they included some material on historical and social context. That material generated a firestorm of controversy that really did not dissipate until the exhibition was over. My question with regard to this set of parks is, one, are you in fact planning to include historical, social context in addition to just descriptions of the items there? Number two, what is going to be your process for determining whether, how you are going to get this historical and social context? I heard description of a balanced presentation, but in the case of the Smithsonian exhibition, that proved extremely difficult to obtain. And third of all, have you talked to the people at the Smithsonian to get some information as to how this enormous controversy developed and what you might be able to do to forestall it? For example, maybe you would wish to actually consider sort of limiting the amount of historical and social context and just present a straightforward description of the science and what happens. But those of us that live in Washington know that that was a huge furor that developed, and people lost their jobs, and all kinds of things happened because of the controversy about this still very controversial event.
That was easy.
Okay.
Yeah, wait, well, first question, real easy one.
Yeah, thanks. Do we have any other? No, I'm just kidding. Let me at least start out. And those ideas are out there. We've already been thinking about that. But until we start the process, we really haven't decided on any of that yet. I think that's part of the process. And I think with something like this, we're going to have public participation in this. We don't usually do that in a interpretive plan, but I don't think we can get around that, and I don't think we want to get around that. I think it's important that we look at that. But as you probably all know, especially if anybody has visited even Independence Hall up in Philadelphia, but many of our Civil War sites around Washington, D.C. and down south, we talk about other aspects besides just the movement of soldiers going through their battles. We also talk about slavery. We talk about the resonance, the effects on the folks that actually had to bear the brunt of some of these battles. They didn't ask for them to come through Antietam and take all of their corn away right at harvest time. So there's a lot of controversy in a lot of different ways. I mean, some of the, sites, Little Bighorn, for example, and some of the other historic sites that we have out in the Southwest and the West, they talk about some heavy, controversial topics that I think is important. And I think it's important to consider that we don't want to hide anything either, because we'll just get as much controversy out of from folks thinking that we're hiding something or trying to ignore something that everyone is probably interested in. So nothing's been set, but I'm just giving you a context of what we look at and make those decisions. That actually will not be coming out of my office. There's another office on interpretive planning. No, I'm going to be doing the general management plan, which is going to delve into everything, because that's what a general management plan does. But for the interpretive part, our office gets involved, but we don't manage that part. Not that I'm trying to blow it off. I'm just telling you the truth.
And I think our comment on the DOE side would be that we stand at the ready to work with the Park Service. The Park Service is really our nation's experts at interpretation, and as Patrick mentioned, they have handled all manner of very sensitive issues. This will certainly have aspects of that as well.
And I don't believe we've spoken to Smithsonian yet, but I might be wrong. And believe me, I live here. I get the Washington Post. I watched that controversy happen on a daily basis. It's something that we really have to be considerate of.
There we go. I think that's better. All right, Bill Twos had a question.
I am proudly wearing the shoulder cap of the Special Engineer Detachment. My good friend Larry O'Rourke and I served at both Columbia University and Oakridge. And the simple answer to the question from the Smithsonian is, this is a World War II presentation of the park. There was no question at that time. Everybody was involved in World War II. We worked 6-day weeks, and the biggest thing, the word I remember more than anything else, the night that we celebrated after the president said that Japan had surrendered, was the war's over, or we did it, we helped. There was no putting down the Japanese. Now, I've got 3 questions. First, the Manhattan Project was a military outburst. Why don't you two get your secretaries to get the Secretary of the Army to join you, or to have one of his historians join you in this project. The Manhattan Project, from the time the Army left until today, has been very shy on historians. Second, you're working on second-hand information. I'd like you to, at each site, see if you can find some people my age who knew what actually happened. And third, don't ignore the university's who worked on this. You can have a slideshow off to the side. And the suppliers. I'm mentioning this because those suppliers are a good source of money. And we have a lot of them. And some of them actually were part of the management in Oakridge. That's it.
Well,
Thanks.
thank you very much, sir, for your service, and thank you for your suggestions. In terms of finding folks similar to you who actually knew what happened, I can tell you at Hanford, we've done some efforts to talk to folks who worked at the bioreactor and at other places on site and make sure that there is an effort to record that history so that we don't lose that. I'm not familiar with the other sites, but I think that's happened as well. And to the department, and from our historical perspective, it's critical to us to have that information. And although we're no longer the Atomic Energy Commission, you know, the department's origins do come from the Atomic Energy Commission. And exactly. So thank you very much.
The National Park Service actually does a very good job in identifying people for oral history, just like you're saying, so that we get those stories as soon as possible. Same thing took place during the erection of the World War II memorial on the mall. We also identified a number of veterans at that time and did oral histories with them. Right. Right. I was talking about getting the stories of the folks that work there. But yes, I identified that as something that we're going to bring up to the folks that are on the team. There's actually 25 people that are on the team working together to get that done. So we'll identify that. That's a good question.
Absolutely.
Several hands up. Okay, Jim is calling over here, then I need to catch somebody over here.
Hi, is any reference going to be made at any of these sites to the metallurgical laboratory at the University of Chicago?
I don't know, but that's one of the things that we did identify is that we're not going to ignore the rest of the Manhattan Project. It's just that we've identified these three key areas, but there are other ways of talking about that. In fact, in this document, we talk about some of the universities and some of the other areas that may become affiliated sites. It's another.
Well, I think it's very important that that there be at least at one of those sites, perhaps Oakridge would be the most important in that connection, because the Met Lab was really the initiating scientific site in terms of the first reactor and designing with DuPont designing the pilot reactor at Oakridge and devising a lot of instrumentation that was used widely on the project. So I think it would be a real loss not to have some representation of that.
Right, that's a good point. Jamie actually put that down. So we'll be talking to them. We will be having by the way, we will be having a debrief with the folks. Jamie and I will be talking to the group that's out in Los Alamos to let them know what we've heard today and to bring those ideas forward for them. Again, we're just in the early stages of this, so hopefully we'll be able to get some of this incorporated into it right away.
Two more over here.
Regarding Los Alamos, they have a very active historical society as well as the Bradbury Museum connected with LANL. How do you envision the Park Service interacting with both of those?
Well, you know, the Park Service, I was actually out there. We had a work meeting in Santa Fe, and we actually went up and visited with the Historical Society there and went through their museum. I actually took a number of photos through there. So that's probably a group that they're meeting with this week, actually. I don't think that they could possibly not have that as an important partner and participant in this. So, but we didn't, maybe Jamie did. I didn't get a schedule of who they're meeting with or anything. We just know that they're out there and having those discussions.
I anticipate the Historical Society and the county, and then also folks from the lab have been interested in having discussions as well.
The B reactor at Hanford, the first plutonium reactor. Plutonium was what ended the war. That reactor was designed 4 stories cube, loaded with uranium slugs. They pulled the rods out and started up, and it ran, and it began to shut down. They didn't know what to do. Fortunately, the designers of the reactor had extra tubes to load the uranium in. They loaded the extra tubes, and the thing continued to produce plutonium. Very fortuitous. And these are interesting stories to put into the archives, that the engineering was not black and white. A lot of problems. And very fortuitous that the reactor was designed with extra tubes, which saved it. The B reactor made the plutonium that ended the war. And these are stories which I think you can investigate that make the thing interesting. It doesn't dry, it becomes very human.
Great, thanks.
Absolutely. And having been in the B reactor and sat in the control room and thought to myself how Enrico Fermi used a slide rule to build all of this, wow. I can't do math without a calculator. So, I mean, it's amazing. And, those are the stories that we want to share with the Park Service so that they can help us share them with the world.
I wanted to follow up just briefly on the question about the Metallurgical Institute and more generally these ancillary sites often at universities. So the University of Chicago, it was the Metallurgical Institute was there, and the names you know well. I mean, starting with Szilard, Compton, Fermi, Franck. There was the Chicago Poll that was very interesting about the use of the bomb. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is now very active. And the Museum of Science and Industry has 1.4 million visitors a year and is now going to be putting on an exhibit about the start of this. So this is a place where there's some synergy. And my question really is related to the question, how do these smaller sites get folded in a way? Because this is a major tourist draw, and it's a place to advertise the National Park Service as well. You can benefit from it.
Right. Again, what we've done is at least identify those originally 4 main sites, the 3 main sites that became a unit of this. But we also understood that there are so many other aspects to the Manhattan Project that we couldn't possibly do. Some were in private ownership, some were universities where it's difficult to say that those are a site. But they could be, like I mentioned earlier, an affiliated area where we give technical assistance. We actually put the arrowhead on, could put the arrowhead on an area that provides that opportunity to do interpretation and working with the National Park Service when they're dealing with the public. So it's early in the stages right now, but that option is still available. Still available to me, or us, yeah.
Hi, I understand it's not decided yet, but for instance, Los Alamos has really strict security requirements. You basically can't get in. The B reactor tour has an age requirement. Oakridge has a citizenship requirement. You have to be a U.S. citizen to go on the tour. Obviously, DOE has its reasons for these security requirements, but are these going to be changed? And are there any other parks where you have to have you can't usually get in? a normal member of the public or somebody from overseas couldn't just visit. Are there any parks that operate under that requirement right now?
Jamie will answer the security issue, and
Yeah.
I'll answer the other
Yeah.
about the parks. Go ahead.
So in terms of the DOE sites and the requirements, we do have, Hanford is actually our only non-producing site, or it's our cleanup-only site. And, we have to balance the issue of continuing work, active work that requires significant security with our desire and our goals to provide public access. So I think that is a question that as we move forward in this process, we are going to need to ask ourselves and take a hard look at, but we do not have a specific answer currently.
Regarding other park units with security issues, there are a number that I can think of that I've attended, but they aren't due to the fact that they're not U.S. citizens or because of contamination. It's usually just security and protection of the resource. I can think of another site, the missile silos out in near Badlands. That area, you can only go there if you have a ranger with you giving a talk. Same thing. There is a location in Catoctin Mountain Park in Maryland that right in the middle of it, it's secure.
I
and
don't
it's
know
visited
why.
by some, but actually some foreign dignitaries are allowed there, so there's not a problem there. And if you haven't figured it out, it's Camp David. But other sites mainly are the fact even quite a few of our interpretive areas are closed unless we have a ranger available, just due to the fact of security for the site. But other than that, I can't think of any.
One question from a Japanese journalist. I have to ask this one. You said you are planning to have consultation with interested entities over the summer. I was wondering if you ever consider inviting authorities or related organizations, institutions in Japan, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, if you consider including their perspectives as well.
Let Jamie answer that one.
So that is a very good question. What I can tell you is the memorandum of agreement that I spoke of earlier will be posted for public comment. And so all manners and types of folks may comment on that. It's my understanding that the Park Service has indicated that, it is interested in reaching out to folks in Nagasaki and other places to discuss with them the story that will be told at the park.
Right, and when we put things out to the public, we receive public comments from all over the world, and we have visitors from all over the world, and we do not look at where they're from to decide whether we look at their comments or not. And so we accept all comments. On public participation, we usually will let all agencies or at least we call stakeholders that have interest in this, and if it's foreign governments like Japan, I would suspect that we would also reach out to them. We're not, because we want to hear the whole story as well as understand what their concerns might be. So again, it's a public process. When we say public, it's open to everybody.
Indicates the high level of interest in your talks, and I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it off here, or else we'll be running on to 8 o'clock tonight. But we're very, very appreciative of having Patrick and Jamie with us.